working women and allies. We have beautiful co-working spaces, content, and community for all your professional and personal needs. We have 10 locations across the country. We have 2 here in Los Angeles. You're sitting at our West LA location. We also have one in Marina Del Rey. We would love to tell you more about our offerings, and I would encourage you to find some of our great staff that's all kind of surrounded around the room, and we'll be up front as well, to tell you more about how you can get involved, how you can get access to more great events like the one tonight, and how you can become part of our union. So without further ado, I want to introduce our founder and CEO, Amy Nelson, who will be moderating tonight's speech.
Thank you so much. I'm going to bring Gloria up because, I mean, yeah. It's kind of hard to introduce you, Gloria. You are many things. You're an activist, a feminist, founder of New York and Ms. magazines, and an author. And thank you so much for spending time with us tonight to talk about your new book. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. I wanted to start by noting that we are both from Ohio, which is amazing. Any other Ohioans or Midwesterners in the The reason I wanted to bring that up is I wanted to ask you what it was like growing up as a girl in Ohio. What you thought about what your life would be like when you were a young girl.
Well, there's a mic in your chair. Sorry. Yep.
I wasn't gonna give you one. I was gonna have you.
Well, let me just say that I went to a high school where the only really firm rule was you had to stop playing football when you were 22. Because everybody was so crazed about football. So the big thing to be was a drum majorette or a cheerleader. And then you got married to somebody who worked in one of the factories in Toledo, and you became a housewife, and that was it, right? Now, I always knew that I had a little way out of that because my mother was insistent that her 2 daughters go to college. So I did have an idea that I could do something different.
Where do you think she got that from?
Well, because her mother made sure that she went to college. So she had come from a working class family, but she had, right. So I knew that that was there, but that just put off the inevitability of getting married and having children, which is a good thing, except that if you think that that's your total identity, which is what we did. So my answer to that was I just kept putting it off. I'm gonna do that, but just not right now. And fortunately, at a certain point, the women's movement came along, the explosion of feminism, and I suddenly learned, wait a minute, not everybody has to live in the same way. That's fan-fucking-tastic. I didn't realize that I was happy, you know, that we all get to make those choices.
That's amazing. What was your first job? Was it in Ohio or was it after college?
Well, actually, I don't know how to say this exactly, but I've never had a job. In the sense that I've never been salaried and worked for somebody else except when after high school working as a sales girl in a dress shop. But other than that, and that was just weekends. Right? So I've always been a freelancer. And you know, the good news is nobody can fire you. The bad news is it's not so easy to pay the rent. But I've just always done that, whether mostly writing, but also editing. That's just the way it happened.
When did you hear the word feminist for the first time?
Oh, that's interesting. You know, I'm not 100% sure, because when we started out, we said women's liberationist. And actually that's a term I still love. But because it was hard for men to say, I'm a woman's liberationist, we actually, at least in my experience, chose feminist so that it could include men.
It does have the word in it.
And also, we get to say what we want. I mean, some people say womanist, some of you know, you can use any word you want, but it's the radical idea that women are full human beings.
Well, you said before that women may be the only group that grow more radical with age. What does radical mean to you?
Well, radical literally means going to the root of something. So it has wrongly been interpreted as being violent. It's not necessarily violent at all. It just means that it's more basic than a reform, I would say. And I think that's especially important for us as female human beings, because it seems that the first step in every hierarchy is, which is called patriarchy 101, right? is controlling women's bodies in order to control birth and how many workers and how many soldiers, whatever. And if there's a strong racist system, or say, as in India, a caste system, then it's even more important because you can't keep races separate, castes separate, classes separate, unless you control reproduction. People fall in love with each other and marry each other, and there goes the caste system. So, you know, I think it's pretty obvious that racism and sexism have always been really deeply intertwined for that reason. And you can't, I would say, be feminist without being anti-racist, and you can't be successful anti-racist without also being, it just goes together.
Thank you, it's so important. And that leads me to something else I think that you said once, which makes sense that we're talking about your quotes, because that's what your book is. But you said, I've learned feminism disproportionately from Black women. And yet the feminist movement has long excluded Black women. We have separated out right to vote, so many other pieces of it. What did you mean by this quote?
I meant that Black women, I literally learned feminism more from Black women, because when feminism was kind of dawning and all the excitement was going on and so on, I was a writer, and because I was writing in New York Magazine, I was getting invitations to speak, but I couldn't write feminist articles for anybody else. They wouldn't publish them. So I realized that speaking was important, and I was terrified of speaking. I mean, forget it, you know. It's like, I mean, I think it's a fear right up there with death, you know, public speaking. But I realized it was very important to do. So I asked a fearless friend, Dorothy Pittman Hughes, who, if you've ever seen the photograph of us with, that's Dorothy Pittman Hughes, who ran the first non-sexist multiracial childcare center, if she would do it with me. And in that way, you know, we discovered it was really good for a white woman and a Black woman, especially in the South, to be speaking together. And then she had a baby and wanted to stay home, so then Florence Kennedy, do you know who Florence Kennedy, the great Florence Kennedy? And especially from Flo, who was a decade older than I, a feminist long before me, and so on. But I think I would say that the public image of the women's movement has excluded Black women, but the reality of the women's movement has always been more Black women, proportionately speaking, than white women. And we discovered this at Ms. Magazine when we did the first ever poll of women's opinions on the women's liberation movement and issues and so on. And some 60-some% of Black women supported the movement and all the issues, and only 30-some% of white women. Now, think about the last election, okay? 96% of Black women voted for Hillary Clinton, and 51% of white women voted for Trump. And because they're dependent on men, they voted the men's interest, whatever. but that has always been true. So I don't think we should say that the women's movement has always, because the women's movement does not belong to white women. It disproportionately belongs to black women. And actually with two friends, I'm now writing a book, I hope. We're off doing other things, but we think we're writing a book.
We should write another book.
You know, Paula Giddings and Beverly Guy Cheptel, two great black women scholars. Anyway, so we all got mad at the same time, all three of us. And we decided we would write a book that highlighting the black women who have always been leading the feminist movement, in fact.
How do you think we get to a place where we talk more about whiteness and the impact that, that whiteness has on the women's movement? Because I think we often talk about women of color, but we don't talk about the white women. How do you think we change that conversation?
No, I think if one person has an adjective, everybody has to have an adjective, okay? So if there are black women, there are white women. I mean, they're just the way it is. It's the equality of adjectives.
That's a good one. Going back for a minute though to age, because I wasn't quite done with that. Fascinated by age and by women, because I think in this country we tend to ignore older women, the voices of older women, the experiences of older women, which are probably the most interesting and deep experiences that we can learn from. What do you think about age makes women more radical?
Well, I think, let's see, how shall I say? I think that when we're before we're 10 or 11, we're kind of our own selves and we're climbing trees and saying, I know what I want, I know what I think, and you're not the boss of me, and stuff like that. And then the whole period of time in which we are supposed to conform and do what women are supposed to do in the central years of life comes down upon us. And even if we're fighting it, as many of us are, it still has a huge influence. But then when you get to be 55 or 60, you're past all of that, they don't care about you anymore because you're neither having or raising children or being in the, whatever, they don't care about you. And then you get radical as hell. And I think the person you are after 50, 60 most resembles the little girl that was climbing trees and saying, I know what I want, I know what I want. Actually, Carolyn Heilbrunn has written brilliantly about women getting more radical with age.
On the other side of that, what do we do to change our society so that the little girls don't lose who they are when they're 10 or 11? I'm deeply invested in that question as the mother of 4 daughters.
Thank you for being the mother of 4 daughters.
We'll see.
I feel, especially with young women, I just feel like I had to wait for some of my friends to be born. I'm so excited to
They'll hang out with you in Seattle this week. They'll be great. But really, do you think, what can we do, so that girls don't lose themselves and their voice and their anger or who they are?
Well, there's so many things, and those of you who are parents, are more up in this than I am, but I think we have to remember that they're watching us. Every time we pass a mirror and criticize our bodies, a girl is watching. And every time we compromise in some way about what it is we can uniquely do, a girl is watching. And every time we let our sons have more freedom than our daughters, a girl gets it in some way. So we and what we do are the biggest teachers. Then I would say the most important thing that I observe is not so much to tell girls what to do, but to listen. Because being listened to is how you know you have something to say. And inside that little girl is a unique human being who could never have happened before and could never happen again. And she's in there from the moment of birth, right? And you never know who you've given birth to probably until they, right, okay, right. So I would say thinking about our own behavior and listening are the two most important things to come to mind, though there are lots more.
Along the lines of listening, another quote of yours, I swear I'm not obsessed with your quotes, but another quote of yours is, I think, you don't learn when you're talking, you learn when you're listening. Who do you listen to?
Well, I love, as I was saying, I didn't want to speak in public, and I did it somewhat accidentally. And because I did it accidentally, we as speaking teams, we always left as much or more time for discussion after we spoke. And in that way, I learned that a group of people in the same room, are utterly amazing. And if you just leave enough time, somebody over here will ask a question, somebody over there will answer it. I mean, people, first of all, it's terribly important that we're together with all five senses. We can only empathize with each other if we are physically together. As much as I love books, you cannot empathize in the same way on the page or on the screen. You don't produce oxytocin, the famous tend and befriend hormone, unless you are together. So, when anybody, male or female, holds a baby, you're flooded with oxytocin. When you see somebody have an accident, even if you don't know that person, you have the human race could not have survived without oxytocin. And what worries me is that we spend more time now looking at screens or paper than we do, well, I don't know statistically, but I think people have correlated the greater incidence of depression, sadness, even suicide, to the advent of isolation, looking at screens. So that's what's so important about this center, and that's what's so important about being together in this room. Hello? It's a gift. It's truly a gift. We've been sitting around campfires for millennia upon millennia, and that's the way human beings empathize and communicate, and we need to spend as much time doing that as we do looking at objects.
Agreed, and it's hard. You mentioned a minute ago when we were talking about girls, you talked about boys for a minute too. And I know that you've been asked this so many times, but I have to ask because at the Riveter, we welcome people of all genders to be part of our membership. We think it's critical to the work that we must do to change the world for women. So how do you think that men should show up and be participants in the women's movement and feminism?
Well, I'm not usually talking to audiences of men, but sometimes I am. And I always say to them, look, it's as if all human qualities were artificially divided up into masculine and feminine. Masculine is more than the feminine ones, but they're still missing the ones wrongly called feminine. Patience, empathy, understanding, all kinds of things. Being with children, originally we were in migratory groups in which men and women raised children equally. Dorothy Dinnerstein has written about this brilliantly. It was the beginning of controlling women, of patriarchy, and separating women and children that is the problem. I don't know what Native American nation or tribe was here, and probably still is here, but they didn't do that. They probably, the languages that I know about anyway, didn't have he and she. They don't have gender. Gender is an invention. Race is an invention. We invented them, we can get rid of them, all right? Sometimes I think the whole world is divided into two kinds of people, those who divide everything into two and those who don't. Gender is a new invention that came along with patriarchy. All my women friends in Indian country make jokes about, you know, what did Columbus find primitive? Equal women, you know. So I don't know about you, but I find it comforting to think that this was not all, we did not always divide ourselves by gender or race. We made it up and we can unmake it up. It's just a fiction. The truth is, we are unique individuals, all of us, and of course we're influenced by the cultural events of gender and race, and we must understand those politics. But the truth is that we are unique individuals who could never have happened before again, and we share our humanity. That's the actual truth.
It's amazing. Politics, you brought up the word. I don't think you'd shy away from talking about it. But I want to, before we talk about 2020, I wanted to ask about gun rights. Because the Supreme Court just ruled that gun manufacturers can be held accountable for injuries the guns inflict upon others. Do you see this as a women's issue, an evolving women's issue?
Yes, and there's a big difference in public opinion polls, I believe, about attitude towards guns. And that ruling is a step forward, but no country on earth is as armed as we are. It's insane. And I don't know exactly what we should, I guess we should do everything. But sometimes I have a little fantasy of the cops offering $500 or $1,000 for each gun, and women sneaking the guns out of the house and turning them in for the money, right? Melt them down into statues or something. And I also think we should make fun of men who need guns. They are so insecure. What is their problem?
I don't get it. 2020. The good news is it's around the corner. What is your greatest hope for the next presidency?
Well, obviously we have to get rid of the accident that I apologize comes from New York, how shall I say? We must remember that he lost by 6 million votes. 3 for Hillary, 3 for other candidates. He is only there because of the Electoral College. It's a very expensive lesson, but I think that we are learning from the sight of this, you know, idiot. And he actually is not exactly an idiot, he's a terminal narcissist. So you can always foretell what he's going to do because he will follow any praise and he will lash out against the smallest criticism. So he is 100% predictable. But the upside is that this is making us woke. We are seriously woke. And we're woke about the Electoral College, which now at least 14 states have rejected, and at a certain point, if enough states say, okay, we're giving our electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote, it becomes irrelevant.
Yeah, I hope so.
And the Electoral College was wanted by the slave states. It was always it was never a good thing. Right? But we've been lazy about getting rid of it because a constitutional amendment takes too much time. But now this other method is going state by state. So it all depends on us turning out and making sure that the voting systems are right. I mean, because there's a lot of effort to interfere with voting, not in this state, but in other states. It is just 100% crucial. And young people, of course, have been voting less than other demographic groups. So, we'll do it in whatever way we can. You know, if you and I come from Ohio, I don't know if we want to go home.
I think we should. I think we should go on a bus tour.
We can do that, you know. We're thinking of getting in a bus and going to swing states. And, you know, we each can do it in a different way, but we have to do it. Voting is not the most we can do, but it is the least we can do.
Very good point. How do you think we get younger people to vote, many of them for the first time?
We take them with us. We talk to them. You know, we explain that this is not explain because it's condescending, but we say, what do you care about? And say, connect that to the vote.
We have the most diverse candidate pool that we've ever had. Is there anyone that's surprised you, or have you learned anything interesting about any of the candidates?
No, I just love that they are diverse and younger, and I think it's fascinating. And my position is I will work my heart out for any one of them. I think we've spent too much time saying who can win, and not enough time saying we're going to make whoever it is win.
Yeah, I think it's a cop-out to talk about who can win. So I want everyone else to have a chance to ask questions, but I have a few more quick questions.
But you can also give me answers because I could
What are you reading right now?
Oh, what am I reading right now? I'm trying to think what's on my desk exactly. Well, actually, there's part of what I'm reading is part of something I want to write about. That Wilma Mankiller, do you know who that is? Who was the chief of the Cherokee Nation? I mean, she's no longer with us, but we were writing a book together about the features of original cultures, older cultures, that we could learn from now. And I'll give you an example which comes from something I'm reading, which is that in one of the oldest cultures in Ghana, if someone does an antisocial act, a destructive act, they do indeed isolate that person briefly, not like, solitary confinement, but briefly, because we are communal creatures, so being isolated is a punishment pretty much everywhere. But when that person comes back into society, everyone who knows that person tells them every good thing they ever did. Doesn't that make sense? We could do that. And we do the reverse. We take votes away, we continue employment away, we continue to punish people. It's insane. So what I'm reading is looking for, and perhaps you can give me examples too, of any culture, but usually it turns out to be the oldest cultures, like the Kwai and the San in Africa, or the old cultures in India, that we could learn from. And it's a kind of amorphous subject, so it's not so easy to find, but you can.
Interesting. I'll buy that book too. Are there any activists who inspire you today?
Oh, there's so many, I can't even. Ai-jen Poo, you know who Ai-jen Poo is? Yeah. The three black feminists who founded Black Lives Matter, and I don't think people still actually know that it was founded by three young black feminists, right? And now probably need to start to found Black Women's Lives Matter, because we have not really absorbed the degree to which Black women, as well, the vision of police violence in the public eye is, I think, mostly directed at men, and it's not about, there's no hierarchy of suffering here, but we need to make everybody visible.
What is something you're excited about in the next year?
That's such a hard question. What is something I'm excited about in the next year? I don't know. I mean, because I get excited about what's happening, next week, next month. I think of the friends I'm going to see. I'm going to go see Alice Walker. I don't know. I mean,
I'd be excited to see Alice Walker. I'll take that. I think that's good. That's a good one. Where is your favorite place to eat in New York? Tips for all of us.
well, when you come right down to it, the truth is maybe disappointing, okay? But there's a kind of luncheonette place called EJ's, which is... do you know this place?
You had so many choices, girl.
But it's near me. It's on the corner of 73rd and 3rd, It has booths. It used to have a bust of, I don't know, singers and so on. I think it's because it's my childhood. No? Yeah. It has booths and I mean, I don't know. I just love it.
And the last question before we open up to the audience is, what would you tell your 18-year-old self about the life you had ahead?
That's a great question.
I think I would just say to my 18-year-old self, it's going to be all right.
And it is. So thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello. Hi, I'm Jen Saxton. I would like to share a comment that I heard and hear your response to it, which was that women will not have political equality and political equal representation until we have economic equality. And that means helping more women break the glass ceiling and helping more female founders achieve unicorn status by investing. And I think it can be really hard as a female founder myself when you have a female-focused business. A lot of investors that are women tend to write smaller checks. And I think that we're seeing the same phenomenon with female candidates in politics, where they're having a harder time. They're going to get a lot more investors with smaller checks to get the same dollar amount as men. So I just wonder if you have any response to that idea that we will not achieve political equality until we have economic equality.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I just worry that it keeps us from using the political power we already have. I mean, the biggest and most important voting bloc in this country and most influential is Black women, who don't have as much economic power as white women, and yet participate more and in many cases have more influence. So the only thing that worries me is that it sounds sequential, you know, like we should wait. No, we shouldn't wait. We should use whatever power we have. And I do think it would be helpful if we make connections. Sometimes women's issues are in silos, you know, like this, without seeing their connection to everything else. So if our economic wizards could just understand, and we have to tell them, that the biggest economic stimulus, when they talk about economic stimulus, they're always talking about Wall Street or something like, no, the biggest economic stimulus in this nation would be equal pay. It would put like $400 billion more in the economy. We're not going to put it in a Swiss bank account, we're going to spend it. It's a great stimulus. So I think the more that we can make those connections, you know, the better. And another big connection we don't make is that the single biggest indicator of whether any country in the world is violent in itself or will use military violence against another country is actually not poverty, not access to natural resources, not religion, or even degree of democracy. It's violence against females. Not because our life is more valuable than men, no, but because that's what we see first in the family, in the neighborhood. It normalizes the idea that one-eyed group has to be. So that should be an element in our foreign policy. You can totally see with terrorist groups that the gender roles are completely polarized. And the more peaceful the group, the less polarized they are. So I think we have to get women's issues out of women's issues and see that they are connected to everything. They are fundamental to everything.
Say something about the gender pay gap, which I think is really interesting. When we talk about it at the Riveter, we talk about it as a household issue. Because still, the majority of men in America today over the age of 18 are married to women. And if the woman in the house isn't earning an equal dollar, it's impacting the household's bottom line. And I think it's helpful to talk about things that men find a way to be included in, and it becomes their problem. And so I think it's a really powerful way to talk about the gender pay gap.
No, I agree, and it's also true that mothers work longer and harder than any other class of worker for less economic reward in a general sense, right? Now, we could do something to help that. We could attribute an economic value at replacement level to everything that, all the work that women do in the home, whether it's parenting or cooking or whatever it is. Attribute value at replacement level and make that tax deductible if you pay taxes. And tax refundable if you don't pay taxes, you know.
Great.
This is not rocket science, we could do this. Right?
It's funny you say that because I was actually going to ask something really similar. So in terms of the presidential campaign, one of the, I guess, freshest ideas in terms of recent political history has been universal basic income. So we've seen a lot of candidates, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Marianne Williamson, Tulsi Gabbard, and then of course Andrew Yang, who have all promoted different variations of universal basic income. And one of the talking points is obviously the value and the way that it pays off for people that aren't explicitly working a job, but instead are working incredibly hard at home. So I was wondering if, not just exclusive to the impact upon women, but in general, with that in mind, do you endorse or are you open to the idea of universal basic income?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, it's a little hard to administer and to make it work, but I think it's a good idea. There's also another idea which has proven successful in individual examples here and in other countries, which is every child who is born gets a savings account of X thousands of dollars. And it's been proven that families will, use that money for education, for, it would be a great leveler for that to happen too. You could also do it that way. There's a book out by Robert Friedman that explains this at great length. I'm trying to think of the name of the book, but anyway, it'll come to me. Okay.
You mentioned Asian who actually just came out with a poll about caregiving in America, and the reason I wanted to ask was because we're talking about mothers in the household and equal pay, but what the poll came out with Maria Shriver and the women's Alzheimer's movement was that there is this growing crisis in America that 2 out of every 3rd caregiver is a woman, and I think that that is something that gets massively overlooked. That we talk about that there is an equal pay, and women are in the household, but we don't talk enough about that people also have to be caregivers for the older generation, and there is this aging crisis in America. So how do we address that, and how coming up into 2020, how do we address that, and how do you see that with something like universal basic income? Thank you. And because I think the newest statistic is that there's 270 billion unpaid care hours.
Well, I think there's a little step forward in the fact that now, if you need a caregiver at home, it can be a relative who gets paid, not just, because that often is somebody who's familiar and knows how, it often works better. That's a tiny step forward. But I think we fundamentally can express ourselves by just, if we are partnered, and I never forgot a woman who got up in an audience like this, we were having this discussion, and she said, okay, pretend you are living with another woman, how would you divide the caregiving and the housework? Now just don't lower your standards. And that's kind of up to us, you know, I mean, because we don't expect or demand, or we do it ourselves because our identity has something to do with how the house looks. I don't know, but we just don't do it. I mean, I remember having this discussion in a group like this, and there was a woman, a young Asian woman, you know, we were like this, only we were getting quite bawdy about the whole thing. And I thought, oh, we're really offending her, right? And she stood up and she said, well, she said, when my husband leaves his underwear on the floor, I find it quite useful to nail it to the floor. That's the spirit. If it's, we divide it equally, you know, as if we were living with another woman. And if in this case it's a he, and he doesn't do it, then it doesn't get done.
Yeah.
I wanted to step away from specific topics. It's just, your resilience is phenomenal. As somebody who is an optimist, but also an activist, there are moments that I find myself sometimes unable to get out of bed. Because in the barrage of the screen that I definitely use too much, every day is a new thing, right? And whether it's probably, should I not read Ronan Farrow's book, or do I read the book and then just be super depressed? And I mean, like, it's category after category, coming at all directions. And you've been doing this a long time. And when you look around and there's presidents like we have and years like we've had, how do you dig deep and continue to go and remain optimistic?
But the important thing is that we not be alone. You know, it's when we are isolated that we're most likely to get depressed and feel powerless. If we need at least once a week, you know, a group we can say how we feel, what we think, discover, you know, new ideas, new support. I mean, we are communal animals. And what worries me the most, as I started out saying, is that we are getting isolated looking at a screen. You know, that really, really, really leads to depression. So fuck those headlines. You know, don't let them take over your brain. To find a couple of friends, do something outrageous, you know. At least sit down and talk to each other and have coffee and discover you're not alone. Don't let you know, Fox News take over your brain, or CNN even, or whatever it is that you're watching. I mean,
but do you ever think, like, shit, I can't believe we're still having this conversation. I thought I took care of this 20 years ago. You know what I mean?
yes, but I think that, speaking for myself, I would say that was my fault. I did, my misconception, not exactly a fault. I didn't understand that change takes time. All right, so what was, say, 30, 40 years ago, supported by maybe 30% or 40% of the public, is now supported by the majority. All the public opinion polls show that the social justice movements, the environmental movement, have changed how the majority thinks. Now, what we also need to learn is that just after success is the most dangerous time. And because the majority has changed, the third or so of the country, that's the Trumpers, or whoever, who really still feel robbed of the old hierarchy, whatever, economic, racial, gender, whatever it was, and they are in full backlash, and this is dangerous. Here's the best comparison I can think of. You know, in domestic violence situations, the time that a woman is most likely to be murdered is just before or just after she escapes, because she is escaping control. I would say the country is escaping control. And this is the time of maximum danger. We have to look out for each other, but we're not going to stop.
I guess I'll stand up. First of all, thank you so much for being here. This has been incredible, and thank you, Amy, for creating this space where we can have these conversations, and to all the staff for setting this up. My name is Alana. I use they, them pronouns, and I have a bit of a personal question for you. I've been a feminist forever. I've been an activist forever. I'm moving into the business of corporate social responsibility, and I'm doing what I can for campaigns. I use all of my energy towards laborers in this direction, and sometimes I feel alone. I look at men who still hold control in a lot of ways, who still hold power in a lot of ways, who will only listen to other men a lot of the time, just not care. And it's gotten to a point where I think my sadness over that has turned into anger. I struggle to be inclusive of men in my feminism, in my activism, because it makes me angry that sometimes they don't care or are flippant or okay with the way things are. But I also recognize the extreme importance of growing together and coming together and working together, and that we all rise up together and we grow the pie together. How do you manage irritation, frustration, anger towards people that don't want to help, that don't want to be involved, that don't want to stand up?
Well, first of all, anger is an energy cell. Anger is not a bad thing. I mean, we're told not to be angry women. Why? We are angry. It's a good thing. Secondly, I think it depends which men. You know, I mean, some men you're never going to convince, and some men are your biggest allies. So I would just encourage us to individualize and not so much groupize, if you know what I mean. And trust your instincts. If your instincts tell you this guy's a jerk, he's a jerk, okay. But if they tell you that he's a dependable ally, he probably is. It's my favorite instinct thing is if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck and walks like a duck and you think it's a pig, it's a pig. Trust that.
Hi, I don't know if I should stand.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Paige Morrow Kendall. Thank you so much, Ms. Steinem, for being here. I'm a writer and a director.
Can you hear?
No.
No,
Oh,
now we
so
can.
Okay.
Sounds so loud because I'm saying my name is Paige Morrow Kendall, and I'm a filmmaker. I'm writing a film about the second wave of feminism, and we're going to be shooting in June. You're in it a lot. I'd love you to read it at some point, hoping I can get it to you. My question is, that time was such an interesting time, obviously, and it's the time my mother grew up, or actually went from her parents' home to her husband's home, and when they got divorced, being on her own for the first time. And I've done a lot of research about that time. My question is, when I grew up more in the 80s, things really seemed to go the other way for a while. I don't remember, I think things are getting better now, but throughout your career and your devotion to the feminist movement, have you seen a lot of ups and downs where, you know, maybe with Phyllis Schlafly, you were just, this isn't gonna work? I'm just curious about your own journey throughout the decades in this work.
Well, I mean, I think we were kind of naive in the beginning, you know, because we thought, this is so obvious. Certainly, if we just explain it, people would and you know, that meant we hadn't looked at history because things take time. You know, you get a critical mass, and then you get to the majority, and then you get a backlash, and it's right. But I do think that we didn't always know what was happening. I'll use Phyllis Schlafly as an example, just because you mentioned her. The country at large thought that she stopped the Equal Rights Amendment. That's utter bullshit. It was the insurance industry that stopped the Equal Rights Amendment, because insurance is the last big industry that is regulated state by state instead of federally. And if the Equal Rights Amendment came along, they realized right towards the end, which is why the last 3 years were so hard, that they would have to stop sex segregating their actuarial tables. And a lot of them are still sex segregated. That is, that if you are a woman who doesn't smoke, you may pay a higher premium than a man who does smoke because you might live longer. Now, you know, to this day, people think Phyllis Schlafly stopped the Equal Rights Amendment. She was just the frosting on the cake. She was recruited. You know, later on, it was the insurance industry that said. So, she was the public face, but she was not the power. So, you know, I think that we need to look more carefully at the politics of the past, because it will help us look more carefully at the politics now, and you know, who is really on our side and who is not, and who we can persuade and who we can't, and who we can just say fuck you to. Right. So it's hard for me, because I lived the 70s, it's hard for me to see them as separate. I don't see them as separate. I just see it as a continuum.
Hi, Gloria. First of all, I want to say you are so inspiring to me since I was a little girl. I heard about your story going into the Playboy Club and going undercover, and I just want to say...
We're going uncovered.
And it's also inspiring being here at Riveter in a place where, you know, you're surrounded by female entrepreneurs, because outside of this room, being an entrepreneur myself, it is a male-dominated industry, especially being a founder, being a CEO. It's like, I'm saying less than 5% females. I went to business school, getting my MBA, 20% females, 80% males, and that's the majority of business schools in the United States. So, and it seems like I stumbled upon business school. I actually thought it was going to be a topic that was dry and boring, and everyone would say you should just go into communications, which I love. Communications is my undergrad. But I think they only wanted me to be in that because I'm a female, because I'm a woman. And actually, when I learned more about it, I saw how cool it was, and being an entrepreneur, and exposed, you know, my female friends in it. But I still feel like it is a boys' club. And when you stand up for yourself, you start being called a man-hater, or you're nagging, and you're just standing up for yourself. And you'll be in a room where it's you against 5 guys who are the founders of an organization. So my question to you is, how do you communicate in such a way that you kind of inspire these people to turn around, you know? And I know some people are just going to be stubborn, but I think the ones that are kind of on the fence, like, what is your secret sauce for getting them to open their eyes?
No, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, as I was saying, how long it took me to know what to say when they called me a bitch. Thank you. And I would say that when they think you're a man-hater and everything, I would treat them with kindness and condescension, and contempt even, you know, because they're crazy. I mean, they're addicted to masculine superiority, that equality is dangerous to them. This is bonkers. Okay, some of it you can kind of understand with that situation, also with Hillary Clinton and so on, because they were raised mostly by women, and most of us were raised mostly by women. There are a whole bunch of men who associate female authority with childhood. And when they see an authoritative woman, they feel regressed, because the last time they saw a woman in power, they were 8. Okay, so,
Good point.
you can talk about that. When was the last time you saw, because some men will recognize that, and some won't. I never forgot all my perfectly adult friends in the press who, when they talked about Hillary Clinton, they would say, I cross my legs whenever I see her. She reminds me of my first wife outside down. Oh, that is crazy. That's totally crazy. But they have grown so accustomed to the idea that masculinity means domination that when it's equality, they feel unmanned. It's their problem, not yours.
That's right.
And I would approach talking about it as their problem, not yours.
Hello, this question is for both of you. Thank you for being here. What is your relationship with an interpretation of crying?
So funny, because I just cried in front of some of my employees yesterday, and I felt like I failed. But I think that really I needed to cry, and that it's okay to be my authentic self, even when I'm sitting in a place of power, right, as a CEO. And that if I don't show up as myself, I'm not able to lead in a way that my company deserves or we all deserve. And I think that crying, it's a release of emotion, just like anger is. It's also okay for me to be angry as hell, which I am a lot of the time at the world. And I think we need to be accepting of ourselves as crying and not see it as weak. And it's not weak if men do it either.
Well, it's interesting you talk about anger, because I think some of us are afraid to get angry because we do cry when we get angry. Is that right? Okay. All right. I was greatly enlightened by a woman, a very top executive years ago, who said to me that she was afraid to get angry when she needed to, justifiably in a work situation, because she started to cry. And then she decided that she would just go with it. So she got angry, she cried, she said to her employees, you may think I am sad. No, this is the way I get angry. I am crying because I'm angry. It's genius, right? It's right. So I think if we just are honest about it and say what's really going on, it's quite helpful.
Two questions. One is about allies, and obviously it's really important to pick them up along the way, but there can be like baggage with that, and I think it can also water down. I'm curious, I think of somebody as like Sheryl Sandberg, for instance, as the antithesis of everything that we should be like standing for and saying. So I'm curious about what you would think about like partnering with somebody like her, who I think has really set us back in certain ways.
You're talking specifically about Sheryl Sandberg? Or
Not
just
specifically. It's like, I think that we all sort of have opportunities to collaborate and work with people, and I think that's really important. But then there's sort of a question at some points of like, is this person, gonna add to it, or is it potentially, and I think there are people who say like, you need to take whoever you can get as an ally. So I was just curious about your take on it. And the other one was, if you could wave a magic wand and like design a new society from scratch to tomorrow, like what some of the new tenets of that would be?
Well, about Sheryl Sandberg specifically, I think that she has been great about helping other women in the organizations where she has worked. And there's a lot she's done that's enormously positive. If you're asking me what I feel about her, because I know her somewhat, just a little bit, I think she has to stop working for terrible guys. Because she has, at Harvard, she was, who was the guy who was, I can't remember what his name was.
Larry Summers.
Yes, thank you, Larry Summers. He was a terrible guy, okay. And then in Washington, now she's with, and so I just hope she will go off on her own and get rid of these, stop being number 2 to a not so great guy. Right?
Hello, my name is Holly Connors, and I'm very honored to be in the same room with you. Let's face
You know,
it,
I forgot to say what I want in an ideal society. Maybe we can save that for the end because that's so big. Okay, great.
Okay, back to me. And Amy, I'm so glad that you are the head of Riveter, and this is my first time coming to this talk to my friend Kate invited me. I used to be an entrepreneur, and now I work for a corporation again. But I also wanted to address what you said about being depressed about everything that's going on, in that I too was very depressed about it, and have been. And I know a lot of people have been and felt powerless to do anything. And so I was lucky enough a year ago to meet a woman who's starting a super PAC to help women run for office. And I said, wow, you're gonna do that? Can I help you? I take photographs. Can I take photographs? Can I hand out papers? Tell me what to do. And I don't really have any time because I have a daughter and I have a really busy job. But she and I started a friendship, and lo and behold, a few months ago, she asked me to be the co-chair of her super PAC. It's called Further PAC, just so you know. And I just, realized here I'm sitting here with Gloria Steinem, and I'm sitting here in a room full of powerful young women who are probably depressed and want to do something. So I would love any advice you might have for becoming an activist in this way. We're brand new, we're just starting what we're doing. I'm learning as I go. I just knew I wanted to do something and didn't know what I was doing, said yes. And I think that's something that any of us who are depressed can do, can just don't worry about it if you don't know enough about what you're doing. Just say yes and find some way you can plug in any way you can to help change things for the better. And I would appreciate any advice, or if you want to come and work with us in any way, and help us get more women elected to Congress, which is our goal. We'd love that.
Well, I'll give you my email and we can figure out, you can tell me, because you understand here, who should be supported. I mean, yes, we can figure this out. Right? I always say to women who are running out, either endorse you or not endorse you, whichever is the more useful.
Any chance that you're gonna get into the race? It's like, and by the way, Amy would make a great VP. There's a ticket up there.
Hi, I'm Michelle Raphael, and I've been waiting 27 years to talk to you after speaking to you on the phone in Phyllis Wedner's kitchen, which is a long story, in New York.
It's totally amazing, right? Well, it's good to see you, right?
It was on the phone. You called. I took a message. I didn't have the guts to tell her that my dream to come to New York, which is why I was in that kitchen, was to work for Ms. Magazine, and that how inspiring I was by you.
Oh my God!
I'm so glad to meet you finally.
It's a different world. 1992, 21-year-old women just out of college didn't think of maybe even making that kind of ask, or can I be introduced to someone? It's amazing now. I'm the mother of a 13-and-a-half-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son, and with the internet and with technology, people are more accessible. In any case, it's changed, and young people are more empowered than I've ever seen, and it's incredible. My question for you is, when you were starting out, and this was a whole new world, was there a mantra, when you realized this was your calling, was there sort of a mantra that kept you going? And if so, what was it? And has it changed over the years? And also, secondly, given that you have done so much on a macro level and really changed the course of history for women, but you do so much on a macro scale, what have been some of the things that you've done for yourself, for self-care, as you are an activist in your daily life and on the road? What are some of the things that have kept you going and just continue to have this incredible longevity and vitality?
Well, to take the last one first, I would say my friends, that you can't do it by yourself. And I have kind of a chosen family of friends in different places in the world and in New York, and you can depend on them to help you when you're down, to tell you when you fuck up, which is really important. And so, you know, that's, you know, we are communal. We do need each other. It's absolutely crucial. Do I have a mantra? That was the first one? Yeah. I don't exactly have a mantra, but I get hooked on what could be. You know, I'm so interested. I think, well, maybe if we did that, that would happen. And if we got that person to call that person, maybe that, it's infinitely interesting. I mean, I get to do what I love every day. I mean, how great is that? And it just, if you do what you care about, what you would do, you know, whether you got paid or not, or what you know, that's, I think, how we know that we are doing something uniquely. Of course, my problem is I get so hooked on that, what if we did this, that I forget that I have a book due. You know? So there are a few problems here, right? But basically, it's doing what you love and care about with people who, however different they are, kind of share the idea.
I think this is the last one, so
Okay, I'll make it a good one. And I'm pivoting off of Amy's theme of quoting you. You once said, at a very important time, still relevant, that abortion rights were the whole ballgame, right? Ownership over our bodies, agency of when and if we want to have children, it's everything, remains true. But what would you say is the whole ballgame for women today?
Well, it's still the whole ballgame, and you can see that it is because you can see the clinics closing in Texas and the people in southern states trying to, you know, I mean, the basis of patriarchy, as I said, and the basis of our problem is that we happen to have wombs and they don't, so it's trying to control our physical selves. It is still the whole ballgame, absolutely. If we don't control our bodies, well, how can we control anything else? It should be the basis of democracy. It has never been the basis of democracy, except before Europeans showed up here, when it was the basis of democracy. So, you know, I would still say that. But there's another whole ballgame, you think?
I think of things like access to wealth, right? Financial literacy, things that have also been withheld from women, that we, you know, it's something else to control,
Yeah.
right? Power that's been taken from us that
No,
can change everything.
Yeah, money is very important, but many things have happened by numbers against people who have money. And still, you know, it has worked out. I was once on a plane going to Boston, and there was another woman who was a very successful financial advisor, and we discovered in talking across the aisle, she was going to Harvard Business School and to speak, and we discovered that we both had absolutely no respect for Harvard Business School. I had once spoken there, it was boring, and she was mad that people who graduated from Harvard Business School thought they, you know, should get this huge salary even though they'd never done anything. Right? Okay, so we decided that we were going to give a joint course at Harvard Business School called Money is Boring. And people who are only interested in money are boring. And we had a little sub-seminar called How Much is Enough? So, I mean, I you know, obviously we're all for economic justice and equal pay, but I do think we need to ridicule rich people who think that they're interesting because they are so not interesting. You know, so it's partly our attitude toward the whole thing. I mean, I think we ought to treat them with kind of pity and humor. Because if we accept the values that only money is important, which it isn't. I mean, think about how things happen. It is not always about money, right? Okay, all right. Everybody should have a nice house and enough to eat and dancing.
Everyone should have dancing.
Yes, everybody should have dancing. But after that, I do think we need to change our attitudes about money, about huge quantities of money, and say, "Oh, poor thing, you really." Alice Walker has a wonderful poem about this that ends. She's talking about the beauty of feathers and shells, and if your chains are made of gold, so much the worse for you.
That's beautiful. That's a good way to end. Gloria, thank you so much. Margaret, to wrap us up.
Hi, everyone. So, everyone in the room imagines have